For in the 19th chapter of the book of Job, there are these well-known words, "For I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. And though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God, whom I shall see for myself, and mine eyes shall behold." These words have lighted the darkness for 25 centuries of human living. They touch us in a peculiar way. In my own congregation, as our dead are led out into the light for the last time, they are repeated. "I know that my Redeemer liveth." Wherever men and women have thought seriously about the issues of life, they have pondered these words and the sentiments of the book of Job. This ancient drama of suffering, and of a suffering shot through by a presence, of suffering examined and suffering redeemed. Once, years ago, on Broadway, great numbers of people, fashionable people in my city, sat. I sat that evening, one of those evenings, and watched the reenactment of this ancient drama. Archibald MacLeish's J.B. in modern dress. Why has this old, hoary, and ancient account lived on to be considered and examined and reflected upon by the succeeding generations of 25 centuries? Why, you ask me? And I answer, because these words of this book speak of the deepest and truest stuff of our human existence. It is, this whole book of Job is an accurate transcript of what human life is all about. It is a biopsy, an extract of living tissue of what our human condition is all about. It speaks of tears and laughter, of joy and sorrow, of health and sickness, of prosperity and adversity, of sunshine and storms, of fair weather and foul, all touched by the living presence of the everlasting God. And that, my brothers, and particularly young men who preach, these are items that never get out of style. For men weep and laugh in all cultures and of all languages. They hope and despair in all cultures. And there is a brooding presence over all of human life. wherever it has lived, it is lived. For all of our lives are lived under the gaze of God, sub specie eternitatis, under the very light of eternity. That's why the book lives on. The 19th chapter finds a man confronting his friends who have for 18 chapters confronted him. They have accused and indicted and condemned and blamed him for 18 chapters. He can bear it no longer. And the 19th chapter is his reply to their gloomy countenances and their long, bitter indictment of his calamity as they sit around the pallet of his misery. He says to them at last, "Why will you vex my soul?" The window has narrowed out of which he looks upon the landscape of life. Once there had been the homes of children and fruitful fields and lowing cattle and bleating sheep. But now the window has narrowed. He sits before he lies midst the graves of his children and the wrecked ruins of his fortune. But then beyond that, his own body is attacked, as is a portion of our human plight and condition. And his friends have assaulted him. They have driven cold steel into his already bleeding spirit. They have added indignity upon indignity, and they have visited insult upon insult. And he can bear it no longer. The window out of which he looks at the landscape of life has narrowed to a slit. But beyond what they have said to him, and that is terrible enough, for he says to them, "Why will you vex my soul and break me in pieces with words? 10 times have you reproached me. You are not ashamed that you make yourselves strange to me. And maybe I have erred," I said, "but why will you magnify?" The window narrows, out of which he looks upon the landscape of his existence. But beyond that, he says that God seems to be his enemy. We humans can bear almost anything if in the darkness of our human plight, when we reach out our hands trembling and pleading, if the great hands that once weighed the mountains in scales and the hills in balances will take hold of our hand, we can bear anything. But the window narrows, out of which he looks upon the landscape of his existence. And in addition to his friends, so-called, who sit around and catalog the reasons found in the failures of his own soul as to his plight, He says, it seems that God has overthrown me. Now, here is where the window does narrow to a slit. If God be for us, then what difference does it make who is against us? If God be for us, then our enemies are like dust. If God be with us, then calamity can come only so close. If God be with us, we can run through a troop and jump over a wall. If God but my Father, if God be against us, what else is there left? I do not know why in the solemn appointments of God that there are times when it does indeed seem as if we've got not a friend on earth or in heaven left. I know this, that God saves us not, and P.T. Forsyth said this in the preacher lectures of 1907, that God saves us not by flattering us, but by opposing us. And my brother preacher, you say that you want great power to move among men's heartstrings. You cannot have that without great sorrow. God can fill only the place that have been emptied of the joys of this life. Do your research. Dale of Carr's Lane in Birmingham had, particularly toward the end, a terribly lonely existence. Charles Spurgeon in the Metropolitan Tabernacle had rheumatism and gout that made life unbearable for him. Frederick W. Robertson at Brighton was so sensitive that the least thing shattered him like the piercing of an eye. George Stewart, who charmed the American South in the first 4 decades of this century, lived in the after-memory of a hunting accident in which a friend was killed by his own gun. This institute is named for L.K. Williams. You and I have talked. A friend, not a preacher, said that he visited the Williams home with Dr. Williams' son, who was then a student at Morehouse, and he said, this man talking to me is not a preacher. He said that Dr. Williams sat in the twilight, and he said that he had never, in the little light there was, looked upon eyes that seemed so sad. And there was a great tear, great sadness in his voice. It was some inward tide of sorrow. And it is said even of our Lord that he became obedient unto the cross. And isn't that great word written there in the ravishing visions of the Revelation? When they look for somebody who is able to open the sea and to read the inscrutable mysteries of our human destiny. And John says that he looked through the heavens and found among the heavenly creatures nobody worthy. Not even those pure beings who forever, perpetually, and endlessly cry, holy, 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 around the lily white throne. But when one did come forth,